1924. Two climbers vanished into Everest's clouds, never seen again. By the early 1920s, Mount Everest had already become the ultimate frontier, the third pole, a summit as remote and forbidding as the Arctic or Antarctic. Britain, seeking triumph after the devastation of the Great War, turned its ambition toward the mountain. To reach its top would mean planting the Union Jack higher than any banner in human history. It was a goal laced with pride, nationalism, and a romantic hunger for discovery. Among those drawn to the challenge was George Mallory, a school teacher turned mountaineer. Tall, handsome, and eloquent, Mallory had the charisma of a man destined for legend. He had already participated in earlier Everest attempts in 1921 and 1922, and when asked why he kept returning, his reply became immortal. Because it's there. By 1924, he was determined that the mountain would not defy him again. With him was Andrew "Sandy" Irvine, a 22-year-old Oxford student and skilled engineer. Irvine was less experienced in climbing but gifted with machinery, making him invaluable for managing the fragile oxygen systems the team hoped would grant them an edge at extreme altitude. Together, they embodied two halves of an ideal: Mallory's seasoned daring and Irvine's youthful strength. That spring, the expedition gathered in Tibet. Caravans of Sherpas carried crates of gear, tents, ropes, cameras, and experimental oxygen cylinders over high passes swept by wind. The base camp, pitched on desolate rock and snow at the foot of Everest, became a small outpost of empire against the roof of the world. From there, the climbers gazed upward at a pyramid of ice and cloud, its summit dazzling by day, invisible by night. They believed, perhaps naively, that persistence and courage could bend the mountain to human will. History, however, would record only how the mountain bent them. In early June 1924, Mallory and Irvine began their ascent, leaving the relative safety of base camp behind. Their route traced the treacherous North Col, a sharp ridge of ice and stone rising above 7,000 meters. From there, they pushed toward the higher camps, each a lonely outpost clinging to the mountain's side, supplied by endless relays of Sherpas who carried loads across slopes raked by avalanches and gales. The climbers advanced in stages. Camp 3, pitched on a windswept plateau, was little more than canvas lashed against the shrieking wind. From there, Mallory wrote brief notes home, describing exhaustion, but also determination. At Camp 4, the air thinned to a silence so profound that every breath rasped like sandpaper. The men relied increasingly on Irvine's modified oxygen rigs, cumbersome cylinders strapped across shoulders, valves hissing with each intake. Photographs captured them trudging upward, bent beneath both weight and ambition. Weather turned their climb into a race against time. Clouds unfurled over the summit like banners of warning, and spindrift avalanches hissed down the slopes. Still, the two men pressed forward, driven by the promise of glory. Companions at lower camps watched their progress through telescopes, tiny black figures inching upward across ridges where the sky swallowed the horizon. Their journals and photographs, recovered later, show moments of camaraderie. Mallory adjusting Irvine's mask, Irvine grinning despite cracked lips, Sherpas brewing tea in battered kettles at dizzying altitudes. But these ordinary snapshots are haunted now by hindsight. For each cheerful image is a reminder that the summit they sought would become their tomb. On June 7th, Mallory wrote that success lay just ahead. He spoke of a final push, of returning victorious. Yet Everest had already begun to write its own ending. The higher they climbed, the less the world would ever know of them. On the morning of June 8, 1924, Mallory and Irvine left their high camp, a fragile tent clinging to the North Ridge at nearly 8,200 meters. Below them stretched a world already far away. Tibet's plateaus wrapped in cloud, rivers glinting like threads of steel. Above loomed the summit, a pyramid of ice less than 1,000 vertical meters away, yet more distant than any horizon they had ever known. They carried experimental oxygen sets strapped like burdens across their backs. Irvine, the young engineer, had worked tirelessly to modify the clumsy regulators, hoping to stretch each cylinder's use. Mallory, experienced but weary, trusted Irvine's mechanical ingenuity as much as his own strength. Together they moved slowly into the thin air, each step a negotiation with exhaustion. At such heights, the mind blurred, judgment faltered, and even tying a knot became monumental labor. Teammates below watched through telescopes. From Camp 4, Noel Odell spotted two tiny figures silhouetted against the snow, climbing a steep step near the summit. He later swore they were going strong for the top, before clouds closed like a curtain, swallowing them in white. It was the last confirmed sighting. What happened in the hours that followed remains one of mountaineering's most enduring mysteries. Did they reach the summit? Decades before Hillary and Tenzing in 1953, only to perish on the descent. Did exhaustion, weather, or failing oxygen turn their climb into tragedy short of the peak? The mountain kept its silence. By nightfall, when the lantern in their camp remained dark, hope dimmed. The storm swept down the ridges, scouring away tracks, concealing all signs. Mallory and Irvine had stepped into legend, leaving only questions at the roof of the world. When evening fell on June 8th, no lantern flickered at the high camp. The storm howled down from the summit, burying the ridge in snow and darkness. At lower camps, teammates waited, straining eyes through telescopes, listening for voices that never came. Hours passed, then days. No trace of movement, no signal fire, no returning figures trudging down the ice. The mountain had swallowed them whole. Search parties climbed as far as they dared, leaving the safety of Camp 4 to scour ridges scoured bare by wind. They found scraps of rope frozen stiff, a solitary ice axe embedded in hard snow, and the faint impression of footprints lost in drifts. But no bodies, no survivors, no final message. The tent above 8,000 meters stood abandoned, its thin fabric sagging beneath frost. Mallory's journal carried only old entries, none from that last fateful morning. The surviving climbers faced the bitter duty of descent. Exhaustion, dwindling supplies, and worsening weather forced them downward, each step haunted by the knowledge that Mallory and Irvine were gone. They carried home only fragments. Testimony of Odell's sighting, photographs of the expedition, and silence where answers should have been. News of the disappearance traveled quickly, turning 2 lost men into legends. Britain mourned them as heroes, symbols of courage and ambition, even in failure. Some believed they had reached the summit, planting the Union Jack almost 3 decades before Hillary and Tenzing. Others saw their loss as proof of Everest's cruelty, a reminder that mountains yield victories sparingly and often at a fatal price. The snow kept its secrets. Beneath the ridges, wind erased every sign. The voices of Mallory and Irvine were gone, but their absence grew louder than any triumph. Everest had spoken, and its language was silence. News of the disappearance spread from Tibet to London with the speed of grief. In Britain, newspapers printed Mallory's famous words, "Because it's there," beside headlines of tragedy. Public imagination transformed the 2 missing men into martyrs of exploration, heroes who had given their lives in pursuit of the impossible. For many, it was easier to believe they had reached the summit before vanishing into the storm. In pubs and parlors, debates burned. Had Mallory, with Irvine at his side, stood on the world's highest point nearly 30 years before Hillary and Tenzing? In Tibet, whispers took another form. Sherpas who had carried supplies spoke of the mountain spirits, guardians that punished those who trespassed. Some claimed strange lights flickered above the ridges on the night of the disappearance, omens or illusions shaped by exhaustion and storm. Others believed Everest itself demanded tribute, taking the strongest as sacrifice. Mountaineering circles dissected every clue. Odell's sighting of 2 figures going strong for the top became scripture and controversy. Had he truly seen them so high, or had distance and cloud deceived him? Their abandoned gear, carefully arranged, suggested intention rather than panic. Yet the absence of bodies kept the truth just out of reach. Over time, Mallory and Irvine's story grew into legend. School children recited their names. Poets wrote of them as if they were knights lost in a frozen quest, and climbers who followed in their steps felt the weight of unfinished history. The lack of proof did not weaken the tale, it strengthened it. Where facts faltered, imagination filled the void. Everest had given the world a mystery, and the world embraced it. Mallory and Irvine became eternal figures, frozen not in death, but in uncertainty. To some, they were the first conquerors of Everest. To others, they remained cautionary ghosts, warning that ambition can be swallowed by the sky. For decades, Everest kept its silence. Expeditions returned again and again, climbing the same ridges, hoping to glimpse some trace of Mallory and Irvine. Each attempt to solve the riddle ended with more questions. In 1933, climbers discovered Irvine's ice axe lodged high on the ridge, a mute artifact staring back from the snow. In 1960, Chinese climbers claimed to have seen a body near the second step, but their report vanished into political silence. The mountain, it seemed, released only fragments, never the whole story. The greatest breakthrough came in 1999, when an American-led team combed the North Face with modern equipment. There, half buried in scree and snow, they found a frozen figure remarkably preserved by the cold. George Mallory. His body lay face down, arms outstretched as if still reaching upward. His clothing, wool, gabardine, hobnailed boots, spoke of another era. His injuries suggested a fall, violent and final, but not enough to tell the entire tale. One detail deepened the mystery. Mallory had always carried a photograph of his wife, Ruth, vowing to leave it on the summit if he succeeded. When his body was searched, the photo was missing. Did he place it on the peak, fulfilling his promise, or had it been lost in the snowstorm of his final hours? No camera was found, and with it vanished the one piece of proof that could settle history's argument. Irvine's body remains undiscovered. Somewhere on Everest's slopes, perhaps entombed in ice, lies his final testimony, along with the camera that might show whether they stood on the roof of the world. Until then, the truth hovers just out of reach, like the summit itself, glimpsed through clouds, but never grasped. Nearly a century after Mallory and Irvine vanished into the mist, the question still lingers like a shadow on Everest's slopes. Did they reach the top? The debate has become part of mountaineering's folklore, a puzzle where every fragment fuels both hope and doubt. Mallory's preserved body suggested he had fallen during descent, perhaps already weakened from a climb higher than any of his peers had dared. Irvine's missing camera, if ever found, could reveal the truth in a single frozen frame. Until then, the summit remains both theirs and not theirs. For Britain of the 1920s, the disappearance struck a deep chord. The nation, scarred by war, saw in Mallory and Irvine symbols of sacrifice and noble struggle. They became myths in tweed and wool, ordinary men who confronted the extraordinary. Later generations, climbing with lighter gear, oxygen perfected, and radio contact, looked back with awe at the audacity of men who carried canvas packs and hobnailed boots into the death zone. Everest had not defeated them quietly. It had transformed them into legend. Today, hikers still pass the memorial cairns at the base of the mountain, stones etched with names lost to altitude and ambition. Their gaze turns upward, where the summit glitters like a star, unreachable yet enticing. Mallory and Irvine live on in that gaze, ghosts on the ridge, half-seen figures moving toward a white horizon. The truth may never be known. Perhaps they stood on the world's highest point, leaving Ruth Mallory's photograph in the snow. Perhaps the storm claimed them short of glory. Either way, their story endures because of what it withholds. Everest's summit is no longer just a place of rock and ice. It is also a shrine to uncertainty, to human daring, and to mysteries the mountain refuses to give away.